Good morning, Juan Valdez's finest. Welcome to Viking Preparedness. I'm Pastor Joe Fox. If you want to run with the big dogs, you got to pee on the tall trees, right? You got to get off the porch. This morning I want to talk to you about a couple related things. A new TV show that I watched a few episodes of yesterday. Ranger School, Homesteading, Wilderness Survival, Survivalism, those types of things. Did you hear that? There's a couple turkeys working my woods right down there. They tempt me. They call to me. Gobble, 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 gobble. Turkey hunters know what I mean. That sound just gets your heart going. There it is again. How do I want to start? Ranger School, I guess, because that's the smallest part. You know, Ranger School, when I went through, and it's probably very similar today, was a course about 2 months long, 58 days when I went through, that was designed to train leadership using patrolling as a vehicle of instruction. And basically, I'm boiling it down here, but basically in Ranger School, one learns to lead cold, wet, tired, and hungry men when you yourself are cold, wet, tired, and hungry. And so that's what you do. And it's pretty hard. It was hard for me at the time, psychologically, just because I was a kid, you know, for lack of a better term. I was a brand new second lieutenant when I went. But the interesting thing about Ranger School is that really for the rest of one's career, and matter of fact, they even said this, short of combat, you won't do anything harder than this. That was mostly true. It was hard, right? And so for the rest of my career, I could look back, if I was doing something that was difficult and go, well, this isn't as hard as Ranger School was. And so you'd already climbed a peak, if you will, and you knew you could do it. And now you're doing these lesser peaks, and you're like, I did Ranger School, I can do this. No big deal. You know, and you were always comparing it. I still do. Compare things to Ranger School. Like the other night, it was pouring and lightning and thundering, and the wind was blowing, and my wife and I were laying in bed, and I said, isn't it cool that we're in here warm and dry? I appreciate those things. And so, you know, I did a hard thing, as many, many, many men have done, and now I guess a couple women. I did a hard thing, and then for a long time after that, I could just look back on that and go, well, I did that, so I can do this. No big deal. Watched a new show. It was on Amazon, but I think it's a Canadian television show called Frontier Quest. And I watched about 3 or 4 episodes of it, because that's how we do things. We binge watch, right? And I enjoyed it. And it was similar, without the political correctness and heavy-handed garbage. It was similar to Frontier House that PBS did a number of years ago, maybe decades ago. Basically, the Canadian company, the producers, secured a large parcel of land somewhere in Canada, Manitoba, I think, and interviewed a whole bunch of couples, and then they were going to select 2 couples, put them on this land, and they would have to be pioneers. What did I say it was called? It's called Pioneer Quest. I might have said Frontier Quest. It's called Pioneer Quest. And they were going to be pioneers for a year. And if they made it a year, they get $100,000. I bet you that's 100,000 Canadian, right? But, so, you know, the first part of it was interviewing all the different people and blah, 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 and that was mildly boring. But then they get to it, and they did not give these people a whole lot of training, and they gave them a whole wagon full of supplies, and they set them out there, and in the middle of a nowhere, kind of out in the boonies, cleared land, like fields and forests, and they get to it, and they start out. One of the two couples immediately leaves, like within 24 hours, so they have to replace them with a backup couple. But they're staying in a wall tent, not very big. I'd say 10 by 12 or something. Two couples in that tent, and they're guided. The thing about reality shows is none of them are real, right? Nothing just happens. But they get some big draft horses, and they have a guy that comes out and helps them with the draft horses to show them how to work them. But they're trying to turn sod to plant crops, because they have to have enough food to get through the winter, and they have to have enough fodder to get through the winter for their critters. And they have some chickens, and they give them a pregnant pig that's going to have piglets. I haven't seen that happen yet. Things like that. They have an allowance of $500 in frontier dollars, and they're allowed to buy things. And so they live in this tent, and I guess it was the wettest it had been in 100 years. It's just horrible rains, just cold, wet. Remember what I said about ranger school? Cold and wet? Yeah, it's just cold and wet out there, and they have them dressed in sort of frontier clothing or pioneer clothing. They were wearing they each, men and women, had a set of modern bib overalls. The women also had the prairie dresses looking stuff. I don't know why they gave them modern bib overalls. That may have been an afterthought. That the producers are kind of adjusting on the fly because they really want this thing to work. But so I'm trying to set the stage, and I'm going to give you some lessons learned for it. And so I'm thinking of the lessons and trying to go back and set the stage for it. So they have axes and tools and things that they're not really used to because they're modern people. I think the one woman's a nurse. Her husband is a welder or something like that. And then the other couple, they're older. They're in their late 40s, early 50s, the other couple. I think they're missionaries or something. But they give them tools that they don't really know how to use and things like that. And so life goes on, and their tasks are plant the garden, and then they started building a log cabin for the young couple to live in. They haven't quite moved into that yet when I quit watching it. And I guess they're going to build a log cabin for the older couple too next. So, some things I noticed that resonated strongly with me, because you know how I say that we are neo-pioneers out here, right? So they start out, and the women are wearing their prairie bonnets and stuff, and the first couple of days it's stinking hot. Well, walking around trying to plow and gather firewood and, chop down trees and stuff like that in a ankle-length skirt, it's no bueno, right? You trip and you fall. And they had issued them like white long john underwear, like one pieces, right? The men and the women had those. And so like day one, they come out there, or maybe day two, the producer and stuff come out to visit them. And the one young woman, she's in her 20s, I think, probably, had like cut off the legs on her long underwear pants and was the first day she's wearing her long underwear with like a flannel shirt over top of it, so it kind of hangs down just above her knees. And so it's kind of like wearing tights, like girls do now, tights under a big shirt. And they're kind of like, you could tell they're like, aren't you supposed to be wearing what the women wore here? And she's like, that's ridiculous, it doesn't work. And then in another scene, she's cut the legs off of those things and she's wearing them like shorts, because it's just the conventions kind of go by the wayside when you're trying to survive. We all see pictures of all the people on the prairie, right? And the women are wearing those long prairie dresses, and the men are wearing what the men wore and that kind of thing. And but photographs were a big deal back in the day. You didn't have your little Instamatic. You certainly didn't have your little cell phone that you could just take selfies with and stuff. And so a photographer would come around. And so of course the people would dress for the photographer. You know it wasn't like today, just go about doing what you do and I'll just hang out and take pictures. No. So I think that there's a good chance that the women didn't always wear their prairie dresses, especially when nobody else is out there but she and her husband and her kids, right? Just something to think about there. Sometimes out here we just wear whatever it takes to get the job done and we're not really concerned about what we look like. So that's one thing. Then another thing, they were talking about hygiene. And it reminded me of a talk we had here with a brother and a sister about how, personal hygiene is kind of a relative thing. Back in the world, where y'all live, I'm a 3-shower-a-day kind of guy. Take one in the morning, work out sometime during the day, take one after I work out, and I usually take a quick one right before I go to bed or after I come home from work, depending on what went on at work. So, I'm like a 3-shower-a-day guy. Out here, when we were living in the trailer, in the caravan, having to heat water in a tea kettle, and the caravan itself wasn't any warmer than it was outside, and then take little cup baths. Back in the 1800s, once a week, that was good. Out here, once a week was good, and it's just like you get used to it. Well, they were all saying the same thing. They were saying, this personal hygiene thing, we don't care anymore. By the time we're done working our day and it's dark and the mosquitoes are out in droves, because in that part of the world, mosquitoes at night are outrageous. We just, once a week's good. The girl started out, because she's a modern woman, the 20-year-old something, obviously she doesn't wear a head covering, but the women back then did. And so she had her hair, and she was brushing it and stuff. Well, then as the hygiene went down, now she's wearing a bandana all the time, right? And that does two things. We taught this in military survival schools. You should cover your head, unless you're like me and you don't have any hair. But you should wear a hat or a bandana when you're out in the woods, because it keeps stuff out of your hair where it gets lodged, like bugs and ticks and dirt and debris and stuff. And so, wearing a bandana if you have hair or a hat or something is a good idea when you're out in the woods. And so they figured that out. There's a scene of them sitting in their tent, 4 adults sitting in this little tent, smaller than this deck I'm on right now. And it's just pouring for like the second day in a row outside. But they do what we do here. They've got buckets out, and they're catching the rainwater, and then they're bowls, and then they're transferring it into their water bucket. It's like free water, because they have a well that they dug, and it's just muddy water. They must have some kind of water purifier or something that they're not showing you off scene, because their well is a mud hole. And they water the horses and the cow and the chickens and stuff with that. But I can't believe that's what they're drinking. I think if they were, there'd be film of that, right? But again, it rains and they catch the rainwater, and that's what we do here. And then they talk about how it's just so hard, the work. It's work from sunup till sundown. And you kind of adjust your day according to the weather, and knowing what the weather's going to be is really important, and having plans to do things when the weather changes is really important. And these are things that resonate totally with us, with me out here. Back in the world with electricity and my cubicle space, it didn't matter what it was doing outside. My day is pretty much the same. And then even when I go home, my day is pretty much the same. Sometimes I have to shovel the driveway. But the weather really didn't have an effect. And out here, the weather's everything. And today is going to be another banner day, like 70 degrees and full sunny blue skies. So we're getting on it today. What else did they do? Oh, that was the other thing. The young woman, they built a kitchen, like an outdoor kitchen, right? And the young woman is kind of, she's talking about, because the two women have divided up kitchen day. And so one day one woman cooks, and then the other day the other woman cooks. And the young woman is saying, I just always dread kitchen day, it's just all day. And then she talks about, this is what I did today. I washed clothes all morning long, and then I cooked for the rest of the day. And she's kind of irritated about that, right? And so they talked to her about that, and they interview her about that. And division of labor, because she fully understands. They ask her, well, why isn't your husband back here cooking, and you're out there, chopping down the logs and dragging them through the woods with the other two men? And she said, I get it. She said, I could tell my husband, why don't you take a turn in the kitchen and I'll go out and help Jack, or whatever the other guy's name is, chop wood. But I can't do the things physically that a man can do. And if we're going to get stuff done, this is why there's this division of labor. Now, the other woman, the missionary woman, she was more of a traditional housewife type woman, and so she didn't mind staying in the kitchen and cooking and stuff. But she said, this is how, people, wow, that was loud and close. People have to eat, and somebody's got to cook it, because, this is all prepare the food by scratch, and, this is just division of labor. And she said it's the same thing with washing clothes. Yeah, we could have the men wash their own clothes, but then what aren't they doing while they're washing clothes? It's the same thing out here. My wife spends a big chunk of her day, more of her day, doing chores than I do. And the chores are involving cleaning and cooking, and cleaning up from cooking. And so while she's doing that, I'm doing things like building the new shed, carrying the dirt from over there to over there, carrying firewood and stuff. And every now and then she gets her head above water and she'll come help me do something like that. But, we got to eat. We got to have mildly clean clothes. They got to get washed. And so I could do that, or I could carry rocks. What do you want to do? And so she got it, and she understood. And, the show's early. I don't think that they're going to make it a year. But that's the joy of the show, right? Will they make it? But no matter what they do after this, they are going to look back on their time as, pioneers, pioneer quest, and say, wow, if we could do that, we could do this. Example, after living for 6 weeks in this tent where everything is wet all the time, they're wet, their beds are wet, the skirts get muddy up to the knees when they're outside, and then they don't dry when they come inside. It's just, ugh. They have this little log cabin that's 10 by 12. They are ecstatic that they've got a little log cabin 10 by 12. It's the same thing here. We have our bug out protocols for Shofar Mountain, and some people have taken us up on that, and you can have a cabin out here. And some people are like, well, we want to build a really big house, and I'm like, okay, if you want to, you can, but you don't need to. And nobody has, because they start looking at money and things like that. But a lot of people don't do it because they're like, well, just building a little basically glorified shed, that's not going to be anything. Let me tell you something. When your choice is a shed or a tent, a shed is much better. And a shed can be pretty nice. The Alaskan trappers, for years lived in little 8x10 shed things. They called them trapper cabins. And they were little. And they can be quite homey. And so everything's relative, right? Comfort is relative. And so I think these couples, no matter what they do after this show, they'll look back on this time here and go, we did that, we can do this. And then, I guess finally, and I need more coffee. In the one show I was watching, the missionary wife, she's not liking it at all. She's only doing it for her husband, and it's all over her face, and her attitude is bad. And everybody thinks she's going to quit, right? And then they say, do you pray? And she goes, I pray every day. I just pray for different things now that I'm out here. Like, Lord, give me a reason to leave. It's like, wow, bad attitude. But then her cousin, nephew, somebody dies. And so she's got to leave to go to the funeral. And she leaves for a day or so. And I was actually thinking she wouldn't come back, right? She'd call it quits once she got that hot shower and electricity. But she came back with a totally different attitude. And they're having a little discussion about it, and they talk about how life out here and out there is harder. It's physically harder, but it's simpler. You're the master of your own day, and everything you do has direct benefit for you. You see direct payoff, like the welder guy, machinist of some kind or something. He went and fixed broken things, broken equipment or something. He said, I work and I'll fix somebody's thing, and they have a fixed thing and I get a paycheck. He goes, out here, everything I do directly affects me and my family. It's the same here. And there's something very satisfying to be the master of your own day. It takes discipline because, I would love to sit here and chit-chat all day and drink more coffee. I've got work to do. But the work I do, I'll get to sit on my porch late this afternoon and look at it and go, I did that. I did that today. Who's the man? I'm the man. All right. So, summing it up, doing the hard things. Every now and then you got to do the hard things. It kind of resets your meter. So, live outside of your comfort zone, at least occasionally. Get familiar with what is outside of your comfort zone and succeed at that. Then you can go back to your comfort zone, but you always know I can go harsher if I have to. Consider the simpler life, getting rid of all the gewgaws and the toys and the crap that just clutters your life, and living a simpler existence where all those things of the world don't matter as much, where, a simple home-cooked meal at the end of a long, arduous day where you can sit down by the light of an oil lamp and read your Bible or your whatever book you want to read, or, just chill instead of staying awake watching a screen until you're bleary-eyed and then falling asleep. It's worthwhile. It's a worthwhile life. Consider it. All right. I appreciate y'all. I'll see you out there.